Hi everybody, Risk Watchdogs Live with my good friend Peter Taylor.
Good morning everybody, and good morning Colin.
Good morning Peter. So it's our weekly update, Risk Watchdogs and the Godfathers of Anarchy, which is just a bit of a laugh between ourselves, isn't it? The fact that we're all crocs, nothing to do with the Sons of Anarchy, the famous TV programme. Just fighting the good fight, as they say. Okay, so we got our normal update for you about cyber and fraud. And just to break this down, really, I think it's about providing knowledge, raising awareness for you, and hopefully preventing crime, stopping the bad guys doing what they're doing. Be that with online, be it in the sort of conventional sort of fraud setting, which you are a specialist with. Okay, Peter, so your slide is next. So I will hand over to you, my friend.
Yeah, this is a follow-on from Friday's Scam Watch, where I talked about the difficulty sometimes of actually selling what you do. I don't mean selling the product, but getting buy-in from stakeholders within the company. But I think what I'm going to talk about should be of interest to anybody who works with an organisation that has a fraud team, a counter fraud team, or counter fraud needs. Yeah. Fraud's very complex. I think we could, just looking at one organisation that I've just been working with, and they've got 135 different ways that fraud can be committed against them. Yeah. So it can be very complex, but what my job, I think, is to try and simplify things so that they're manageable and you can communicate them easily within a business. The easier you can communicate, the more likely you are to get buy-in and get support and action. So I wouldn't be arrogant enough to tell people this is the strategy that you must have, but I just thought I'd share a fairly common fraud strategy across insurance, banking, retail. And that is there are four things that you want to do with fraud. The first thing is trying to prevent fraud, so that's stopping fraudsters becoming customers, but also stopping existing customers or existing staff becoming fraudsters. Yeah. Being able to detect fraud, so have you got a system in place? Have you got something running that will spot anomalies and anomalous transactions or anomalous claims? And that will tend to be a combination of automated systems, so fraud abuse systems, but also manual as well, that somebody looks at something and says this isn't right, something's wrong. A vital part of detection as well, though, is validation. So that's eliminating false positives, which was on a conference the other week. I wasn't speaking, I was listening. And the curse, it was actually described as the curse of false positives. And I think not attending to false positives, it can be the downfall of some really good fraud systems. And then the next step is contain. So that's about containing fraud. So that means so you suspect you've got a fraud. You've not been able to validate it, so now you want to find out whether there is one and what you can do about it. So that might be stopping a transaction, stopping a claim, or whatever. There are different ways you can do that, but it tends to be some kind of analysis, a fraud analyst or a fraud investigator. They may do desktop inquiries, which may be covert. So that might be checking the data held on that person, the information that you can get from social media or whatever, or overt, which is where you've actually involved the customer, if it's customer fraud, or the employee, if it's employee fraud, and ask them what has happened and find out more from them. And then the bit that sometimes gets forgotten is that you've then got to analyse that information. So there has to be some form of measurement to demonstrate whether or not the system is working. Now, there's a lot more to it than that, but quite simply, I've actually put these in the wrong order, I've realised. It's almost like a circle that you prevent fraud. You then have to detect it, because you will never prevent all fraud out of your business. You then have to detect it, you then have to contain it, and you then have to measure it. And then from the measurement and the analysis, you are able to build in corrective action plans and continuous improvement in your system of prevention, detection, and containment. And that has to keep going. So it's always a live event, fraud. You know, it will always be happening. But so, you know, anybody watching, how is this useful to you? Well, if you've got a fraud team, you know, you will find that most of your systems will fit into this. And if you have got a clear strategy, you can roll it out across different types of fraud. So that might be customer fraud, supplier fraud, employee fraud, third-party fraud, external frauds, and you can communicate it fairly easily. And you've probably got a system in place now, but have a look at your system and see if it fits in with prevent, detect, contain, and analyze. And it probably will, or it will be close to that. If you're a vendor and you've got a product or a service that you want to assist companies with in relation to fraud, think about how your product helps to prevent, detect, contain, or measure fraud. You know, so where is it going to hit? If you are really lucky, you might have something that prevents, detects, contains, and analyzes. But do be careful out there. Don't go claiming that you can do the lot if you can only do part of it. I'm seeing a lot of that at the moment. You know, the answer to ransomware, for example, is a suite of measures and things that need to be done. It's not any single product that you can buy off the shelf that'll stop ransomware. And that's me really. But as I say, important thing though is keep it simple when it comes to the strategy. And everything should start with a strategy. If you've got your strategy right, you get your policy, you get your process, and then eventually it comes down to culture. You know, but if you won't create the best culture unless you've got a strategy, a policy, and a process in for fraud.
No, I couldn't agree more. And the KISS principle, keep it simple, stupid, it's always to do with this. But anybody that knows me, and you know, I'm a big fan of analysis, and I think, you know, that what you said there is absolutely bang on. But it needs to work at both a strategic and a tactical level. So and that's learning about, you know, what happened in the last 12 months or so. How's that going to define how we're going to move forward and change things? And the shifting sands, aren't they? Because criminals change their methods. You know, the climate changes in all sorts of different ways. So, but analysis is absolutely fundamental, isn't it? But in all sorts of spaces. So
it's an arbitrary comment, but I would say fraud has actually changed more in the last 3 years than it has in the last 30, and it's accelerating. The changes are accelerating.
Technology, I guess. That's one part of it. So on the technology front then, just looking back at cyber bites from this week, quite an interesting one, because one of the, and I think this is overlooked a lot actually, and I've not seen this in a figure, but I think it was Egress did a poll and saying that when an employee has clicked on a phishing email and caused, you know, malicious software to be in the network or the system, 23% of people have lost their jobs or have been fired as a result. Or they've voluntarily left. So you just look at that in terms of the human cost. I mean, first thing that I've got a question is, why aren't we training people? And maybe there's some of those people that have been trained. I don't know. They didn't go into that sort of detail, but it's, you know, training people in the detection of or how able to recognise a suspicious email should be fundamental in any business now. It's as valuable as health and safety training. In fact, you could call it digital health and safety, couldn't you?
Absolutely.
That's an idea for some courses. So, you know, you train somebody up, and you know, and I don't. Maybe there's an age demographic in this, and you know, some of the people that we train are, you know, getting on a bit and don't really tune into this stuff so well. But I don't know if there's an age thing in that as well. But you can't blame people if you don't train them. What you can do is train them and then tie it into the CPD, can't you?
Absolutely. And the other thing as well is that, again, in my experience as a leader myself, if somebody does make a mistake and it's an honest mistake, and there's no cloud over them, then they're far less likely to make the mistake again than if you get rid of them and bring somebody new in
exactly. Deal with it.
You know, and it's it's that blame culture, whereas
Yeah.
really you should be looking for an improvement culture.
Exactly.
Yeah.
But there is a bit, people are, I always say they're your last line of defence. So it's so important to train them.
Yeah.
Web conferencing was in the news, so that popped up again. And there's sort of examples. They gave sort of 2 or 3 examples of sort of people appearing on calls. Malicious links being placed into the chat. So, so somebody comes along they get into the system somehow, they get into the call, they put a malicious link in, and that then corrupts people's networks. And I suppose at a practical level, I've seen it on LinkedIn, I'm sure you have, and I've seen it on social media, other social media platforms. I'm having this conference, here's the link. Well, you then don't know who's going to turn up. So you need to be in charge of the keys to the door, don't you? So the way I do it is I will circulate a registration form, and I'll vet people before I send out the invites. If I don't recognise them, they don't come in. Paid, but of course. But the other thing is updates. Make sure your updates are done on your systems. I mean, it might take a few minutes, but WebEx that we use does frequent updates, and I'm sure the others do. But just make sure they're installed, because they're patching a flaw.
Yeah, somebody who runs, we both do. We do a lot of remote training, and just a little bit of discipline as well, which is so you can see here, Peter Taylor, Colin, Tansley, of actually putting your name in. So many people don't do that, or they leave it blank, or they put a joke name in. No, that's absolutely fine if it's a one-to-one. But if you've got something where there might be 1,000 people coming in, or 500 people, or 20, it does get a little bit more difficult. And you're playing a guest game. And I've got to admit, I'm the same as you, Colin. If I don't know who they are and I'm not expecting them, and they're not on the list, then I remove them rather than admit them, and then they'll email me. And the other one is, if you've got a 10 o'clock meeting, start logging on at 5 to 10. Don't at 10 o'clock start clicking links.
It is about etiquette, and I always say this, because sometimes some of these platforms you've got to download something, and that might take a few minutes. So then you're delaying everybody else, aren't you? So there is a bit about sort of the practicalities of it as well. And I did have somebody register for a webinar yesterday, and I didn't recognise the email address. And I asked for name and email address. They put the email address in both of them. No idea about that. And then finally, Internet of Things, electric vehicles. So this was flagging up that there's a big push on around climate change, around electric vehicles and use of them. It's the Internet of Things. And as per usual, functionality comes first. Very little sort of thought given to security, and already there's issues being flagged up about flaws and vulnerabilities in these things. People hackers potentially able to get personal data, maybe even, I think, abstract electricity was mentioned in one of the pieces I read. So again, it's about updates and being aware. If you see an update, do it, but just make sure it's a genuine one that will come to you as a user to your account. So they're just a few of the things to sort of be aware of for this week. As always,
just be careful out there.
I put in there about the risk assessments. I know we spoke about fraud and risk assessments. We've got the cyber one. We've had some uptick on the AML risk assessments, and that's what I've been doing this week, doing some presentations on that. Obviously, the training is always there, both face-to-face like this, e-learning, and obviously both available for any consultancy to help you out. And as you always say,
let's be careful out there. Hit me cue this time, Colin.
All right, thanks very much, Peter. Thank you for listening, everybody. I hope it's been helpful.
Thank you.
We're back next week.